welcome to the Code Show with Dino Kai. Today we're speaking with Gwenton Slowley, who is running for leadership in New Cross. So we're going to hear from him today about what has led him to this position to run, why it's important that we have independent candidates that break from the two-party law. Labour, Conservatives, as African Caribbeans, by and large, we can agree that Conservatives don't really represent our interests. And then we can't vote Labour because they take our votes for granted. And if we head back 6 months ago and just look at the little circus that was run around our West brothers and sisters, and within that the policy of benign neglect, where solutions are always implied, but somehow never manifest once the party is elected. And the minute that Joe Biden met with civic leaders and let them know ceremoniously that there'd be no specific tangibles for African Americans. So how do we circumvent that over here? And how do we support candidates that are truly there to represent our interests in a bottom-up politic, because there's no such thing as a trickle-down economics. So we want to welcome Gwenton this evening and hear a little bit from Gwenton about how he came to this position and why he decided to run for New Cross. Gwenton, welcome to the show.
Blessing and thanks for having me, Dean. My first introduction into politics was in 2019. So 2019, I decided to run in the Whitefoot area of Catford. And the Green Party supported me so much that they decided not to run against me in 2019 because we were following some of the similar principles. With 2 months practice, I came fourth. So 95 votes shy of the Conservative Party that was in power and still in power up to today's date. So I thought I had done my bit for the community, raised awareness that we can go out and vote instead of being a part of the major two parties. And I hung my gloves up when it came to politics. Then about 2 months ago, I had different people from across the community reach out to me and pleading, Gwenton, please, there's a seat in Catford, there's one in Bellingham, there's one in New Cross. We're begging you, you need to run again. And I said, look, I'm done with politics. Get someone else to go and run. I'll support them. And they said, no, you're the man for the job. And at first I thought, I don't really want nothing to do with this again. But sometimes you get a calling and you have to go out there and follow your calling. My thing is this, I'm not about talking. I lead by example. So if I'm going to tell you to go and do something and you're acting nervous or your anxiety is taking over you, I will go and run the race. But it's for other people in the community to understand that even though I'm out here running the race, this isn't about me. This is about us. There's a big difference here. You understand? And I want people to take away that message there and understand that you don't have to put up with the nonsense you've been putting up with, where people, as you said, Dean, taking your votes for granted, this entitlement behavior is what we're seeing, where people think they're entitled to your votes. It's like a religious ceremony when they're going around, oh yeah, they're going to vote for us again. I grew up in a house where they believed that they had to vote for Labour. And if I wasn't removed from that conditioning, I would still believe that I have to do that. It's like when someone says to you,
absolutely,
what religion are you? And you're not the same religion as that individual. And you feel that pressure to say, oh, I'm either the same religion as them, or oh, I'm not really into religious, I'm a spiritual person. It's the same thing when it comes to politics. People feel pressured into voting for people, and they don't even know why they're voting for them. You there, Dean?
Sorry. So I'm on a bit of a delay on my end, and I'm working out my technical difficulties because this is my first broadcast.
Yeah, no problem.
I will say that I agree 110% with your recognition of running in the face of nobody being there. This is why, knowing my role, I take a back seat, and it is to enable you guys as much as possible, introduce you to each other, and then just bring through the relevant policies that ADPAC has been researching for the past 5 years. So in running in New Cross, you understand the unique problems, especially what is presented in terms of serious youth violence, because of your previous role in terms of youth engagement. How do you see the public health approach really informing the stemming of violence towards young people from young people? Because number one, we know it's a huge cultural problem, in that criminality has been accepted as a mainstream culture, as opposed to the separation when there were bad boys in your area and there was everyone else who would just be outside, who would be aware, but there was a very distinct classification between young men who carried knives and were willing to use them and everybody else in the community. But those lines are very blurred at this point in time.
Yeah.
So how do you see the
actually
interconnectivity of agencies? And I'm talking about specifically now the grassroots agencies that are culturally competent, who are your colleagues that you've come across over the past 5 years?
The first thing I'll say to that is answer the first part of the question. It has to be a trauma-based model. The community has taken in so much embedded trauma, we have to deal with that first. And I'll give you an example of that trauma. The minute people heard I was running in New Cross, the theme that I was getting was, Gwenton, it's time. We need to find out what happened to those people in the New Cross fire, and you're the man for the job. What that says to me, it isn't just about the lives lost in that fire, because as you know, I had to champion a fire of an 8-year-old just 2 years ago, 2 roads away from where the New Cross fire happened. So it's about the trauma, the ongoing trauma and suffering of the people within that community. We've got great grassroots people down there, like we've got Daniel Pink, we've got Royston John, amongst many others down there, the Ubuntu family, that are doing some tremendous work with the young people. Most of them have been the young mayor of Lewisham over the years. But it's about, are they getting the chance to shine the light on the positive work they're doing, to empower the other young people within the borough to see that you don't have to fall into criminality. You don't have to get pressured to carry a knife or a machete as part of your uniform. But when you look at the current state of play, where the individuals that are in power, they will say that they care about that to get the vote. But once they get in, nobody sees them again. I've worked in Lewisham for 15 years. I started off giving the local authority 1-bedroom self-contained properties for the young men and women that were trying to flee violence. After that, they asked me to come down there 1 night a week. That then turned into 10 years. So I've seen on both levels, at a senior prac and as a frontline worker, that it's a state of crisis when it comes to youth crime. We went down there to shoot a video a few weeks ago, and within half an hour, we had a young person trying to take our camera in broad daylight. So when you look at that, what else is the other people in the community facing on a daily basis, where a young man just died just last week, stabbed to death on the streets? And when we look at the impact on taxpayers, it's 1.7 million to investigate each murder from start to finish, depending on how many co-defendants there is. So why couldn't we have preserved that life and invested that money into something else? And if we calculate the amount of murders that's happened in the past 2 weeks, that's over 5 million worth of investigation in 2 weeks, because we've had 2 murders within 2 weeks in the same patch. And yet then there seems to be no improvement with working closely with the community leaders that we've got down there, because unique part of Lewisham is Deptford and New Cross. They're like the heart and soul of the borough. So when you look for historical, when we're talking about slavery and the slave ships coming in, that was just across the road in Deptford. A lot of people live there that don't even know the history of the place. So it's about bringing the community back together and making sure people understand where they're living and allow their voices to be heard. I think that is the one thing that I saw working in Lewisham for all those years. The residents felt like they were suffering in silence. That was the biggest problem. Things were happening without their consent or even having a conversation with them. It was just happening. It was like, well, this is what we've done. There's nothing you could do about it. We're going to continue doing the same. And I think that is why now you're seeing a lot of people saying, you know what, I'd rather not vote. Because what's the point of voting if no one's listening to me?
Absolutely. So the important thing is that your role will connect resources to solution providers and grassroots solution providers that you, number one, know to be genuine, number two, know to be culturally competent. And I know the specific history you're speaking about because my family moved to New Cross in 1981, just before the fire. I went to Kenda Primary. I went to Addie and Stanhope in Deptford. I'm aware of the docks where you've got the chain right at the front of the market, which is where our ancestors were bought and catalogued as property as they were just passing through. So it's very important that we have someone as an African Caribbean candidate who understands uniquely from the grassroots up what the problems are on the ground, what needs to be done, who the solution providers are, but also understands the needs of the wider community as well. Because I think this is something that often gets looked at when African Caribbean candidates step up. Oh, you're only for Black people, which we've never done at any stage of being in the country as professionals. You would have had no necessary pick and choose of the young people that you were serving who were escaping violence. And you understand there are cross-cutting themes that go across all ethnicities. However, there are very important distinctions to be made when it comes to African Caribbeans that don't get met when it comes to policies like benign neglect. So I'll just touch on the recent deployment of this policy of benign neglect very quickly, which a lot of us recognize as the gaslighting from the Conservative Party, which is to recognize a problem and just look at it and say, the problem will solve itself. We don't need to acknowledge it. We don't need to apply resources. And when we think about the fallout from a murder, not only the emotional and spiritual format in the void of that life that hits communities and families, but the economic fallout of a murder that you rightly identified was 1.7 million. I was still under the impression that it was 1.4 million end to end. But in that 1.7 million, you know that you could hit 30 grassroots organizations on the ground to run robust programs that created wraparound care for young people. And we're not just talking about the early intervention of rites of passage or supplementary schools. We're talking right across the board in terms of youth advocacy, organizations like Black Child Agenda and taking positive steps, and even for them to be able to train staff to more robustly grow out their services. These are immense amounts of money that are being wasted on lives that are being wasted. So I just want the listening audience to very much understand the importance of voting in a candidate that's truly representative of our interests. So could you speak a little bit as to your experience with delivery partners on the ground?
So first thing I'll start off by saying I'm also a part of the management committee on the Garvey Village. So regardless of politics, the work was getting done regardless. So that's just something I want to make clear there. Is so people don't get confused and think, oh, the work will only get done if you get voted in. We are doing the work. We are there. If we didn't lose our building in Catford, we would have still had the after school club and had the domino club for the elderly people to come in and still be giving them their food and offering them all the care that they needed. But sadly, there was no one there to speak up for our building, and the building was taken away. So now the people in the community have nowhere to go. From working in the borough for 10 years on the front line, there's a lot of grassroots organization doing some amazing work. But what happens is they struggle to survive
Yeah.
when it comes to payment by results. Not because they can't deliver the results. It's about having that surplus to be able to pay the staff until they are paid. And a lot of the time, after you send an invoice, it could take another 2 to 3 months for that invoice to be paid. So a lot of the small organizations are then forced out of the area because they're not able to sustain the payment by results. That was the first thing that happened to them. The next thing that happened to them was they were either forced into the council. So once they go into the council, they then have to follow the council rules and all the bureaucracy that comes with that and the politics. So all that authentic work that they were doing outside is all gone out the window because now you're now ticking targets. They're now asking you to see 1,000 young people for £500 and £1,000, which they know is not achievable. So what people then tend to do is be ticking boxes instead of doing that quality work that they were doing before from the heart, because now they're under pressure to hit stats that are unachievable. And it's the same thing when we look at the young kids on the borough that are being medicated. A lot of them are being diagnosed with acute mental health and being told that they've got ADHD, Tourette's, autism, Asperger's, and the family are being given medication, but not given what was once called a statement, now called an EHCP plan, which is a protection for the young people to stop them being excluded from school. They could also, once you've got the HCP plan, have the money released to have a mentor or support worker in the school to support that young person from being excluded. And also management moves are not being looked at. So instead of a young person getting a management move where they could have a fresh start in another school, they're being excluded, sent to a people referral unit, and then fast-tracked into the criminal justice system. And these are the same young people that we will see being incarcerated and indoctrinated and then being read scriptures that they don't understand. And people are then surprised how we've got homegrown terrorists coming out of prison, which were these same young people that were fast-tracked through school, not learning how to read or write. There's actually a school on Bromley Road where the young people go there from 6 years old. And at lunchtime, they'll be looking through the fence. And when they look through the fence, the other young people that are in secondary school are through the other side of the fence. So the young person knows from 6 years old, I will never be going to a mainstream school. I'll be going over there with the young boys that's jumping on the teacher's back and being given hot chocolate with lots of sugar in it to keep them calm in the class. So we need to look at the amount of young people's lives that are being destroyed before it's even started. And unless we've got grassroots organizations that know the people, know the area, we will continue to look at number crunching happening where there's no actual work being done with young people. Instead, they could pump out these figures, send them back to the Home Office and the Mayor's Office and say, oh, look at what good work we've done. When really, what have you really done? Engage with no one. All you've done is made up some stats and put them out. And it's the same thing with other stuff when we look at the housing in the borough, which is something that I'm looking to champion. They've got these massive skyscrapers coming up all across the borough where there used to be green space and blocking out the natural light to people that have lived there 30, 40, 50 years. So now you get no natural light coming into your house. It's also blocking the wind. So when people are wondering why the toxic air is so much in certain parts of the borough, you have to look at the buildings that's blocking the carbon dioxide. And it's about 1 or 2 social housing on each floor. But when they're doing the planning permission, they're telling you, oh, don't worry, we're going to have 30 to 40% social housing or affordable housing. But affordable to who? Because a part of New Cross is Telegraph Hill. And Telegraph Hill is as if you're living in Chelsea. Yep. So when they're saying affordable housing, to which part of Telegraph Hill? This is what we need to find out. And These are things the residents are asking. Affordable to which part of the street? Because I can't afford to live in there. And especially if something happens, especially with the lockdown, a lot of people ending up on benefits, your universal credit is not going to cover
No.
that property. So you will then become homeless and you'll be told that you've made yourself intentionally homeless. So that means for the rest of your life, you'll not be entitled to another council property. No fault of your own, but because you were forced to move into a property that was unaffordable, not affordable, unaffordable for the normal London living wage. Yeah. So we need to look at the language that these people are using and break it down for the community so the community are not tricked into taking options that look glossy, like glassy buildings, because those glassy buildings are getting a lot of people into the homeless shelter with their children.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we've seen that gentrification time and time again. I don't want to leave the issue of youth solutions so quickly just yet, but I'm really glad that you've introduced a fully connected picture that shows from the family environment and the disruptions that can happen that will all lead to that kind of youth displacement, because we don't really ask the questions and investigate. And as you've made it plain, if we're looking at results-based funding, where was this criteria actually drawn up? What consultation was had with the beneficiaries of that funding? Where was the representation from the African Caribbean community? And we know that it doesn't really take place. We're outside of those rooms when those decisions are made. And I know that we've both been down to the mayor's office and consulted how many times, but how many of those recommendations were taken up by Khan's mayor's office, who's been in since May 2016? So when we're connecting the dots and we're talking about the public health approach, I'm really glad that you've brought housing into the picture, the school exclusions into the picture, which just lead children and young people to have far too much time on their hands. And then we start to look at empowering those organizations, as I said, taking positive steps, Black Child Agenda, because then when they take up the advocacy, we know that the children are more than just numbers. They are actually being represented within the educational institutions and their rights are being protected. So give us, because I've heard you speak about it before, your understanding of the public health approach and the joined up interconnectivity of agencies that are creating wraparound care for young people. And that goes from the school advocacy through rites of passage, supplementary schools, child parent intervention, as you understand, and all of those organizations in between.
If we look at where the model originally came from, first of all, in Glasgow, I remember when they were having consultations before they brought it into London, because I was sitting on the panels when they were discussing it. And one of the missing components out of that was the grassroots organizations. It was statutory led, local authority led. So when you've got something being led by the local authority, the community that are grassroots are then being directed to the safer neighborhood funds to be funded. So the normal money that comes down from the Home Office or the Mayor's Office to deliver that piece of work was going out to the local authorities. So as I said, the local authority were then integrating the community groups into the council, so they didn't have to be accountable to the community anymore. So once you bring a local community group into the local authority, you then dictate to them how the service is delivered. So the other services and organizations that refuse to be manipulated and brought inside the local authority, they don't get any funding. So once you don't get any funding and you start making noise, after a while, they make it look as if you're just the angry community person, because all you want is money. Why can't you do it for the love? And all of that sort of stuff they start saying. So it's that whole divide and conquer business going on, where some people get let in the house, others don't. And the ones that get let in the house, they're not going to speak out against what is actually happening to them as well inside, not knowing that they will only be funded for as long as it needs for them to keep quiet.
Absolutely.
The Safer Neighborhood Fund, you could apply for, I think it was up to £5,000. Yeah. So if we're thinking about all the grassroots organizations within the community applying for this small chunk of money, so the money that they would have given to one organization before has now been chopped up into 10 or 15 sections to give out to 10 or 15 organizations. Meanwhile, the millions go straight into the local authority and they continue to do work that shows no outcomes.
Absolutely.
The reason I link the housing into the youth crime and everything else is this: it's an integral part of it. Because if a young person is even threatened with being stabbed, the option might be to move that family.
Mm-hmm.
Where do we move that family? You've got housing associations within the borough that have just got houses within a small cluster. So unless you could move or get a mutual exchange with someone else, that family will only be moving 2 roads up the road. How have you kept them safe if they're only 2 roads away from the area of risk? So then for the family to move wider out to be protected, their tenancy is then being tampered with, because you're now moving from a assured tenancy, lifetime tenancy, to probably an assured shorthold, meaning temporary tenancy,
Mm-hmm.
or you're given a license or given a deposit to go into private accommodation, which is now you've now got an uncertain future. A lot of the families are being told, well, if your children are really at risk, you will take whatever we give you. So if you, your son, and your 3 children have to live in a 1-room bedsit for however long a string is, that's where you're going. So when we're looking at that, a lot of families are looking and saying, wait a minute, I'd rather stay where I am. So when we're seeing the violence going round as a cycle, is because a lot of the families are not getting the housing support they need to move, or they're being offered places such as Sheffield, which might not be culturally matched for that family all to go up there, because they're now piloting into an area where they're the only people going to look like them in that area.
Yep.
There's not even any risk assessment being done on the street that they're going to or the property that they're being moved into. So they're saying, wait a minute, why would I move out of one dangerous place to go somewhere else where no one's risk assessing the place, and then I end up in another gang area, and once I move there, there's no support services for me there. So there's a lot of stuff that go into this, and every single thing is connected. So even though they might look like they're not connected, it's all interlinked.
This is the beauty of having someone who has a particular background, because there's no substitute for experience and you can't fake it. We've seen for 30 years the numbers games where they will juggle statistics, and they're just made up statistics where the real beneficiaries aren't getting treated. So what you've been talking about is something that APAC will articulate on a regular basis, which is transformational policy. And our quagmire is always, how do we put that transformational policy into practice? Well, ladies and gentlemen, you're looking at it. This is a local candidate who is running for a borough that I know very, very well. And in a very short space of time, where you would have ghetto boys and New Cross young men, which is where I grew up, they have a very violent and long history. And the only way to bring initiatives and policies that are going to benefit the local people is by putting transformational policy into place. But you have to look at every single area of life. You have to have a unique understanding that is culturally competent of the local population as well. And then, even more importantly, a true desire to solve those problems. So, can you give us an idea of what the picture will look like with Gwenton Slowley in local authority in the first 3 months?
So within the first 3 months, one of the first things I pledged to do is this: demand transparency into what has been done, first and foremost, into the investigation of the New Cross fire and Joe Uri's fire in 2018, because I've spoken to the mom recently and she's still waiting for an update. So we're going to demand that, first of all, and be transparent with the community to let them see what response we've got. The next thing which I've said, which I know is going to rumple some people's feathers, is I'm willing to look for a building, first of all, and put some money towards the building and ask for the other councillors in the ward that have been there for a while comfortably to match fund the money that I put up to keep that building open. Then we're going to go to the mayor, Damien Egan, who gets 175,000 a year, to at least give even the £5,000 of his 175,000 to contribute towards that building staying open. That building could become a hub, not only for the elderly people that are stuck in their house, feeling trapped, but also for the young people to come in and get their tuition and their support. And also, if they want counseling and therapeutic support, we have got people in the community that are willing to offer that service. And we will make sure, if everyone contributes, because I'm going to hold them accountable. And also as well, why wouldn't they want to give back to the community if they love the community so much? 175,000. You could at least give back 5,000. So
I hear you, Gwenton. I envisage some small resistance there.
No,
to be frank with you, sir.
But Dean, listen, this is what the people need to see. This is what we called a change of politics now. We're coming to be transparent, to show you who you're voting for. The MPs are getting £70,000 plus expenses. So why can't they contribute a small sum towards the building as a start? That's going to help the community if they really love the people so much.
Because, I agree with you.
Because look,
I will just offer this.
Yeah.
And it's an entrepreneurial look as well. Now, last year after George Floyd's murder, you had a hell of a lot of big corporate companies, KPMGs and the likes, talking about the tens of millions that they were going to dedicate to Black Lives Matter, which we fully know never came to fruition. No problem. Because we have colleagues who are also local authority candidates, when we go collectively for their corporate social responsibility programs, for small offerings like this, and we're talking about properties that are between £20,000 and £40,000 a year in terms of rent, we can look at those collective corporate CSR programs and they can join. For them, it is a feel good, giving back. It is a photographic moment as well. But they know that it's going to the genuine outlet of the people who need it most on the ground. And if that is delivered through local authority candidates such as yourself, then they know that it's going to be used in the correct way. And if a KPMG also choose to audit it and donate that service as well, it'd be fantastic. But it's another way of looking at raising the funding where we do offer our distant cousins the opportunity in terms of corporate CSR. Now, we're on LinkedIn Live right now, and I know that there's a hell of a lot of people that have reached out to me recently that are working with corporate CSR programs that would love to be connected to you and talk about funding local hubs where all of those grassroots organizations, through the public health approach, could collaborate, which is exactly what we speak about as ADPAC. What are your views on that?
I think more streams the better, because enough talking and enough complaining, enough blaming the government, blaming politicians, blaming everyone else.
Yeah,
let's do for self. And
absolutely,
that's something that I always put out there. And everyone around me, I like everyone to be self-sufficient and not be relying on whether it's state or anyone else. Yeah. So if I'm living like that, I want everyone around me to have that same mindset, and putting on entrepreneurial programs where we're looking at young children drug dealing and living an entrepreneurial lifestyle
Absolutely.
on the edge. You then use their transferable skills and bring them back in house and show them how to use those skills that they've learned out there in the wilderness in a legal way where they don't have to worry about getting arrested or their stuff getting taken away from them. And if we're looking, a lot of them already started doing that with the music side. So they're
Absolutely.
trying to legitimize themselves by transitioning to music. So with all of that corporate responsibility program, I would also invite some of them back in to let them see that there's other alternatives to actually poisoning your own community. So you could go and buy a watch with diamonds in there or drive a flash car. There's other alternatives to doing that. So that's something that I welcome, and we'll look at putting that into best practice.
And I'm glad you brought up the transferable skills because is something that me and Nana from Access UK were looking at about 3 years ago with the Road CEO program. Julian Hall is doing it with younger people, which is
Yeah,
early intervention with ultra kids, and is really an amalgamation of all of those organizations that are providing the services collaborating. Number one, so you've got a seamless transition from early intervention all the way up to when we say young people, now we've got to talk about 30 because we know that there's a very strong culture of criminality that is celebrated. The
yeah,
music obviously puts that culture on steroids. And we've seen it in the States that those who've made the greatest transitions, Jay-Z as a billionaire, 50 Cent now as a TV producer across multiple shows with the biggest deal in TV history, came from a life of dealing drugs.
yeah,
That number one just gave them very quick brains where the synaptics are very connected. And rather than see those potentials wasted or duplicated by those who are less intelligent, less fortunate, who lose their lives, because let's not pretend, me and you both know that all walks of life have laws. A law is an absolute. Red means stop, amber means get ready, green means go. And young people who don't necessarily decide to further their education aren't as committed to learning the rules that are going to sustain you, which is why we want these wraparound programs such as the schools to industry pipeline from 3 to 21, bringing together all of those cross-cutting theme delivery partners that go from early intervention all the way up to university introductions and industry introductions where they're introduced to mentors, and at every step of the way it is paid backwards so that mentors who might be doing an internship in a company are enabling university students are enabling those at secondary school to create the path, those in secondary school who might be prefects are working within the rites of passage organizations so that we can see a clear pathway from 3 to 21, how to make it from nursery into industry, so that in 24 months' time, neither me, you, or anybody else in our community is mentioning the rhetoric of
yeah,
a schools to prison pipeline. Now, if we make that a national initiative, and as councillors, we're coming together as grassroots organizations, as a full consortium, and then bringing that to these corporations with their CSR programs to fund buildings and virtuous programs that are going to add to better British citizens. We never ask for anything as African Caribbeans because we're special. We ask because we pay tax and we're exactly the same. However, you know that organizations like Redfred will come through when there's £1 million contract to be had and they will gobble up the M, top slice a large majority of that money as a, what do we call them? Admin fees, and then trickle out the shrapnel to the grassroots organizations who are finding it hard to sustain themselves. So there's no secret as to why they're finding it hard to sustain themselves. And more importantly, a lot of people that don't actually realize that this is how the bigger funding from MOPAC and these guys goes, that might say this was 10 million into serious youth violence. And then we as consumers would turn around and say, well, look, they're in exactly the same position. They waste the money, they squander it, not knowing that money didn't touch the sides in exactly the same way it went down in Wembley or the contract between London Underground and the government and the private sector with companies that went bust because they top slice it and leave nothing left for delivery. So can you speak a little bit towards your experience and understanding of situations like that?
The first thing we'll look at is class, first and foremost.
Yeah.
So it depends on the class of the board applying for the slice of that cake and in what way you apply for that. And I'll tell you why. When I first came into this sector and I was applying for funding, I was applying with, I'm in the community, I know what I'm doing, this is what it is. And you'll get some money, not a lot.
Mm-hmm.
The minute you change your approach and apply for the money, like, look, this is what we've done, this is how much we want. Just the narrative is different. Not, could I have some? This is how much we want. You get a different response.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes when you're mentioning Red Thread and other organizations like that, you need to visit the board of Red Thread to understand the culture of Red Thread and why it operates and mobilizes the way it does. The people that sit on the board of organizations like that are wealthy businessmen and women that are looking at a vehicle differently to the average person within the community that has given up their job or come out of retirement to try and help what they will call their village. Yeah. To reduce the crime in the village, to keep the neighbors safe.
Mm-hmm.
It's a different mindset to someone that's going to approach this with a corporate aggressive mindset, as if we're demanding this. No one's going to tell us that we're not taking this. It's a total different mindset when you're actually doing something out of love. Yeah. To the person that is looking at, okay, this is what we could do for that, number crunching. And that brings us right back to why the grassroots organizations in the community were wiped out, because
Mm-hmm.
those larger companies, they could have a surplus of millions to tie them over until their invoice is paid to pay their staff. So they will always win these contracts, because also some of these contracts, you have to show how much your turnover is.
Absolutely.
And a lot of the grassroots organization, sad to say, they've not learned how to, how could we put this politely, not just do things for the love of it, where you need to be registered, make
Yep.
sure all the filing is done and everything else. And that's where I think a lot of the organizations lose out, because when they want to see your filing history, there might be none or little to none. And because of that, you're now put in the back of the race where someone's had 15 years filing history and they've got a surplus of 20 or something million put down in the bank, plus their assets are worth however much. So the liability of giving them that money is going to be small to the organization that really wants to do things for the people and actually know the people and will actually do the work. They're then always going to be put at the back burner, and that is the sad thing what happens in the community. And this is why when I joined the Garvey Village management team, that was one of the first things I said: we have to upskill the community. We have to make sure everyone has financial literacy, because if not, we're going to continue facing the problem that we've been facing for years. And it's about mobilizing, as you said, come together as a consortium. Makes you stronger. If I've got 10 years filing, you've only got 5 together, we got 15 years filing. And it's about people understanding when you come together as one, you can move forward. It's the same thing we're trying to do here now, for people to understand, look, what we've been doing before ain't been working. Let's
Absolutely.
mobilize and get back to how things were before, how it was before. Because before, we wouldn't have to have this conversation.
Yeah.
Because if we did, people like Diane Abbott and Bernie Grant would not have got in. So why has the conversation changed? And it's for people to understand where they've lost their way. Instead of voting for symbols and looking at symbols, look at the person, check the person's track record. And could you actually hold that person accountable? No, you can't. and that's what we need to look at in the community. Why is this happening? Because of us, not them. Because
Absolutely.
we continue to do the same thing, so we keep getting the same treatment. So if you do the same thing again on May the 6th, don't complain on May the 7th or on the night of May the 6th that you're getting treated the same, because it's the same people. What they've done is invited their cousins or their friends in that have played
Nepotism.
the game. You
Yeah.
understand? So that's all it is. It's like a big wheel, and who gets a turn to drive the car? So you've been good, you've played the game, you've kept quiet. We're going to nominate you. You come and you have a turn to drive the car, maybe press the horn as we're going around the corner, but you're not going to do any more than that, because that's as far as you're allowed to go. And that's what we're trying to show here, is that, look, we understand the system, but unless we stand together, we're not going to get change.
Absolutely. And this is how legacy seats come about. You know, if we're talking about a legacy seat, we could take the borough of Haringey with a David Lammy that won after the Honourable, I would say, Bernie Grant passed away. And because we deal to a large degree with optics rather than policy, rather than aligning together to actually deal with what our concerns are, there's very little regard for a sizable population who should have power, but just aren't necessarily collectively organized in a way that they should be to get the benefits in terms of lobbying. So I know many of the die-hard um, community leaders in Tottenham, and I know just how frustrated they are at the lack of advancement over the course of 15 years, and the amount of murders, the fact that services are decreasing. So listen to
But
Gwenton and do
but let
not,
me challenge you, Dean, on that point there.
please.
Yeah? This is what I'm going to challenge you on that point, because I've had this debate with other people.
I welcome
Having
the
the
challenge, sir.
Yeah, all right. On having the privilege of this being my second time running, the first time I went in it, I was emotionally connected,
Yeah, yeah,
twisted. You know what was going on. So this time my head's clear. I've had people like you around me to make sure that everything's running smoothly in the background. Got a manager. So my head is clear to get on with what I need to get on with. The reason why I say I challenge you on that point is this. If someone's hands is tied, they can't help you anyway.
but I
So
fully concur.
yeah,
This is the policy of benign neglect.
so if you're voting in someone with shackles on their hands and feet, but you're still voting them in, you've enabled someone to become a victim of their circumstance.
Absolutely.
So you can't then blame someone when they become a victim of their circumstance to come out of the shackles and speak up for you, because you knew while you were putting them in there as a hostage that they weren't ever going to be able to come out of that paradigm to speak. It was never going to happen. And this is why when I look at people blaming politicians and blaming Khan, don't blame Sadiq Khan for nothing. You've got an option to change Sadiq Khan. You understand? You've had the option to change Lamy and whoever else, but chose not to. So
Absolutely.
if you're, it's like enabling someone. You've enabled the man to continue doing what he's doing. You can't then hold him to account if he has no power to do what you really want him to do. He was saying that on the leaflet as he's knocking your door. I'm going to bring you the sun, the moon, and the skies, and don't worry, I promise you, as soon as I get in, I'm going to do that. That's the robot within politicians talking to you. There's a
Absolutely.
difference with a human that is running. I'm not a politician. I'm not trying to become famous. If I wanted to be an MP, I'll wait till the seat goes up for MP and I'll run. I don't have to say, yes, sir, please, let me roll over, and then you tickle my belly. I don't need to do all of that. And that is what happens in politics. People roll over to have their belly tickled and then they get a seat. We need to look and see how we change stuff instead of looking how things are not changing. And
Absolutely.
that's the difference. Not how it's not changing, because it's never going to change, because the system and structures that are in place are not there to be bent. They're not there to be changed. So unless you've got some new construction workers going in to rebuild the system, you're going to be dealing with the same broadband service for the rest of the time. And it's not about complaining when your broadband's running slow because you had the option to go to an alternative. Simple.
110%. And I welcome your challenge. I agree with everything you've said. You're pushing on an open door. And I think this is one of the things, whereas a community, we've been very naive and we've been complicit with a policy of benign neglect. We can't really look outside. If somebody promises to bring you bread in the morning and then 30 days later, the bread you've paid for has never been delivered and you still continue to hire that person, that's entirely on us. So we are presented with an opportunity to do something very different in the borough of Lewisham, in the ward of New Cross, with my brother Huey Rose, who I'll be interviewing from the We Matter Party on Friday, who is running for Enfield in the ward of Southbury. Again, agreed to the schools to industry pipeline initiative, which is going to create wraparound care for young people so that we can go to the corporate CSR programs and fund these type of initiatives. Is very important that those diehards will see a Claudine Dewberry run everywhere. We'll see a Cheryl Phoenix run everywhere as an individual, where at their stage of experience and expertise, they are supposed to be scaling up, training the trainers, and be well funded to do that. They should have 150 grand for infrastructure in terms of communication systems, project management systems, training trainers, and just to create that curriculum so that we know that children are well advocated for, not only in London, but UK wide. These are the type of transformative policies we're talking about. And when we have a number of colleagues in different boroughs, and you're talking about that tiny little share of money from each of them, it makes up a substantial amount for us. So where some organizations that say money like 150 grand isn't money, I agree wholeheartedly, it's not money. But in our world, we know how transformative that is, just to lay solid foundations. Now, somebody else is going to pay that as a retainer for somebody to redesign their logo. But in our little old world, we're going to set an entire infrastructure that is going to carry us through 12 months. And we're well aware of that. So in summing up, we've got 7 minutes left. Tell us about what you would really like to convey to the people in terms of when you're in office, what you don't like about New Cross, what you're going to change about New Cross, and how you think New Cross will look in 24 months' time for the constituents of the borough.
So the first thing we'll look at is the air pollution, because unlike certain other areas within London, New Cross and bordering Deptford has some of the most dangerous toxic air pollution down there, to the point where it's been accepted, legally accepted, for taking a young girl's life, Rosamond's daughter, on her way to school. So that is something that we need to look at. And some of the strategies that I'm looking at, they've started moving the plant pots that were brought in with this corona agenda. So because the emergency services were struggling to get to the patients. So if you could remove some of the plant pots, why haven't you removed the rest of them? And then we try and manage the traffic within peak times. Because even yesterday I was outside there and the traffic was not moving for at least an hour. So when we're looking at that congested traffic that's just sitting there, how do we redirect the traffic? The next thing we're going to be looking at is, what are the stats? We need transparency with the stats of young people that are being medicated, and match that to the young people that are being held at the youth offending service and fast tracked into the criminal justice system. Track that back to the schools that the young people are coming from, to see if there's a common theme there, and have a meeting with the schools and the governors at the school to see how we could reduce that or
And
put things
data
in place.
collection by us is
Yes.
pivotal within that, so that we can't be manipulated in terms of massaging the figures.
Yeah, so we need definite transparency on that, and to keep a track of what's happening with that first and foremost. And then with the street crime, one of the things that needs to change down in New Cross is the street lights. They have partnered up with Croydon, and they've brought in these new lights, LED lights, which are dimmer than the old lights that they had where you go up there and change the bulbs. So a lot of people are feeling unsafe walking home late at nights, because that's now given criminals and other people the opportunity to go undiscovered in the nighttime when they're committing crime. The open drug dealing that is happening
Yep.
down there. New Cross is considered a countryside. So you have people piloting in from all over the country to drug deal in New Cross.
Yep.
That is also impacting on the crime levels down there.
Youth violence,
Yeah, because you
competition.
have different drug dealers fighting for the patch. When one drug dealer is taken out, then there becomes a vacuum, and the young
Absolutely.
people start trying to kill each other for that patch. So it's about making the community feel safe, and the young people feel safe where they can go outside and play without feeling like they're going to get shot or stabbed or be groomed into drug dealing. So
Yeah.
that's something I want to see happen within the first 12 months. Training the police as well, so the
Absolutely.
police learn de-escalation tactics, instead of we seeing these videos go around where the police are looking like they're manhandling the community. So
And just on that point,
yeah,
I was going to say not to cut you, but I always say that and
yeah,
then I cut people. Another transformative policy that we're looking at from Desmond Jeddo, who's running for the Police and Crime Commissioner in the West Midlands, is looking at local communities to ethnically represent them in terms of policing, which is, I know, a very important conversation to be had with the mayor. But don't let me cut you.
yeah. And that is something that we could go to other communities and learn from, because there's other
Absolutely.
communities that police themselves already within
Yeah.
London. So we could go and sit with the leaders of that community and learn best practice from them, how they've integrated that into the local police system, where they're recognized as being able to police their own area. So that's something that I'm going to go look at. Also, I'm going to take a trip down to Bristol and find out how they've gone about doing the reparation down there in Bristol
Absolutely.
as best
You,
practice.
you,
So
sir, you could have a conversation with Esther Costa Zoze. I will connect you to each other,
okay.
because she has been the driving force behind the reparations movement and the success that they have in Bristol. So you would get an inside view from her. And then, as someone who is liaising with the council, that would be fantastic, because these are very important programs. It's actually number one on the manifesto of ADPAC, and it's a very important topic that has been brushed aside, just as our humanity was brushed aside in the transatlantic slave trade and the African Holocaust that ensued. And me and you both know that the results of that continue to this day. And when England says, well, it wasn't here, no, it was carried out by Britain, out of sight, out of mind, in the Caribbean. And the horrific nature of that trading, kidnap, rape, torture on a daily basis, murder, for unpaid labor in Jamaica. Actually, I wrote this down, so I'm just going to touch on this. Britain extracted 200 years of slavery from 20 million people through their role in the African Holocaust and the transatlantic slave trade. So, to some degree, we definitely have to investigate this now. And it has to be a very important question that is put to government, local authorities on all levels, and especially where you are in New Cross, where we can see the evidence of the docks, where even colleagues of mine were having conversations about the commemorations and putting the statues around Deptford Market. However, we're not here to discuss optics or any hollow points right now. It's all about policy and putting transformative policy into place. So please carry on, sir.
And I'm running for New Cross. If I was in Deptford, I'll be dealing with that issue. But yeah, so my ending message will be this. I'm no different to anyone in the community. I'll make that clear. I am not a politician. I'm not trying to become famous. I'm not trying to make money because I've already got my own company. My thing is, we've raised awareness. The amount of love that the community showed on this time round is emotional.
Yeah.
It's about people learning from this. No matter what happens on the 6th of May, it's about everyone learning from this. We've got a young man, a YouTuber running for the Mayor of London. That is a young man. Whether he's doing it seriously or not, we'll never know. But the fact that the young man, Nico, has took the get up and go and decided to run is for other young people watching this out there to understand you could be whatever you want to be in this country. Just be determined and have the right people around you. And I'll end on this point. Do the same, you get more of the same, don't complain. Simple slogan.
110%. There it is from Gwenton Slowley. And, you know, the moniker of this show is Agree, Adopt, Apply. If you're in the borough of New Cross, vote for candidate Gwenton Slowley for transformational policy, because ADPAC is only backing parties and individual candidates that are going to produce transformational policy for the local citizens, but also and especially for African Caribbean population who've been overlooked by a policy of benign neglect. We're not more special than anybody else. We're exactly the same, and we demand exactly the same treatment as everybody else. So I want to thank you, Gwenton. I wish you luck on the 6th. I don't believe you'll need it. Vote for Gwenton on the 6th, New Cross Borough, and we'll be here next week, Wednesday, 5 o'clock, same time. Thank you for listening, and please share this message with anyone that you find of interest. To all of the professionals who are watching, type ADPAC volunteer in Google, and please sign up for one of our volunteer programs where we signpost organizations and grassroots community-led initiatives so that you can collaborate and they can get a little bit of that corporate nous that Gwenton was talking about. This is Dino Kai. This is the Code Show that informs better African Caribbean code. Thank you for watching.
Blessing and love.